The day Amaka married Tobi, she believed she was stepping into a life of love, understanding, and companionship. Their wedding was grand, filled with joy, music, and the promise of a bright future. Amaka, a thriving hairstylist with a booming salon, had built a name for herself in the beauty industry. Tobi, a businessman with sharp instincts, had always been ambitious, determined to succeed in the competitive corporate world. As they danced, Amaka had no idea that this perfect night was the beginning of a silent battle, one that would test her strength, her love, and everything she believed about marriage. From the outside, they seemed like the perfect couple, two young, successful individuals ready to build a home together. But beneath the surface, there were unspoken expectations, beliefs that had been ingrained in Tobi from childhood. He had grown up in a home where his father was the unquestioned ruler, and his mother catered to him without resistance. To him, marriage meant control. He expected obedience, submission, and an unwavering dedication to his needs. Amaka, however, had different ideas. She saw marriage as a partnership, not servitude. But on that wedding day, as they smiled for the cameras and danced in the glow of celebration, neither of them knew that their biggest battle was yet to come. The honeymoon was everything Amaka had hoped for: beautiful sunsets, long conversations, and stolen kisses. Tobi was charming, attentive, and loving. She felt like the luckiest woman alive. But as the excitement of their new life together settled, the first cracks in their perfect picture began to show. One morning, Amaka woke up early to prepare breakfast before heading to her salon. As she set the table, Tobi walked in, stretching and yawning. "Good morning, my love," she greeted cheerfully. He sat down, glanced at the meal, and frowned. "Where's my tea?" he asked. Amaka chuckled. "I didn't make tea, but I can get you some juice." Tobi leaned back, unimpressed. A wife should know how her husband likes things without being told. "My mother always made tea for my father every morning, without fail." Amaka paused, spoon in hand. It was a small comment, but something about it unsettled her. "Tobi, I'm not your mother." She kept her tone light, but his gaze darkened slightly. "I know," he said after a moment. "But some traditions shouldn't change." She let it go, not wanting to ruin the morning. But in the back of her mind, she wondered, was this just a casual remark, or the beginning of something deeper? The first few weeks of marriage were blissful. Amaka and Tobi enjoyed the warmth of their new home, the thrill of waking up next to each other, and the excitement of building a life together. Their apartment, tastefully decorated with Amaka's keen eye for style, felt like a sanctuary. She loved cooking for them both when she had time, but between managing her growing salon and adjusting to marital life, she sometimes ordered takeout or asked the housemaid to prepare meals. Tobi, however, didn't seem pleased whenever she did this. At first, she brushed it off, thinking it was a minor irritation. But soon, she realized it was much more than that. One evening, as they sat for dinner, Tobi pushed his plate away and frowned. "You didn't cook this yourself, did you?" he asked, eyeing the plate of jollof rice with suspicion. Amaka, tired from a long day, sighed. "Tobi, I was exhausted. The housemaid prepared it." "What's the difference?" His expression darkened. "A wife should take care of her husband's meals. That's her duty." Amaka chuckled, thinking he was joking, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't. A chill ran through her. Was this what marriage meant to him? The beginning of an unspoken battle between love and submission had just begun. Tobi had grown up watching his father dictate every aspect of their home while his mother quietly complied. To him, that was the natural order of things: a man commands, a woman obeys. It didn't matter that Amaka was successful in her own right. In his mind, a wife's first priority should always be her husband and home. The subtle conflicts that had begun in their marriage were not random. They were the result of Tobi's deep-seated beliefs, ones that he expected Amaka to embrace without question. One afternoon, Amaka returned home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Tobi with a home-cooked meal. She found him in the living room, scrolling through his phone with a deep frown. "You came home early?" he asked, looking up. Amaka smiled. "Yes, I wanted us to have dinner together." He nodded approvingly. "Good. This is how it should be. You're my wife now, Amaka. Your home should come first." Amaka's smile faltered slightly, but she forced herself to focus on the moment. Love meant compromise, didn't it? But as time passed, she would realize that compromise was the last thing on Tobi's mind. The first real fight came unexpectedly. Amaka had just returned from the salon late one evening, exhausted but satisfied with how her business was growing. She found Tobi sitting in the dark, his arms crossed. "Where have you been?" he asked sharply. She blinked in surprise. "At work, Tobi. You knew I had late appointments today." His eyes narrowed. "You're a married woman now, Amaka. No responsible wife comes home at this hour." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Tobi, I run a business. Are you expecting me to abandon it?" His jaw clenched. "A woman's place is in the home. You should be here when I get back, cooking my meals, taking care of things." Amaka's heart pounded. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. She had expected challenges in marriage, but she had not expected to fight for her own independence. That night, for the first time, she realized that love alone might not be enough to keep them together. The tension between Amaka and Tobi did not go unnoticed by their friends and family. Hifoma, Amaka's closest friend, sensed something was wrong when Amaka began canceling their outings and looking more withdrawn. One afternoon, over lunch, Hifoma gently asked, "Are you happy, Amaka?" Amaka hesitated before sighing. "I don't know, Ife. Tobi is different now. He wants me to act like a woman from another century." Hifoma leaned forward. "You have to set boundaries now, Amaka. If you give in too much, he'll walk all over you." Meanwhile, Tobi's mother had a different message. During a visit, she said with a knowing smile, "Marriage is about obedience, my dear. A wife should know her place." Amaka's stomach twisted at those words. Was she truly expected to shrink herself just to fit into Tobi's version of a wife? As the weeks passed, Amaka's frustration grew. She loved her husband, but his outdated views on marriage suffocated her. She had worked hard to build her salon, and she wasn't about to let anyone, husband or not, strip her of her dreams. Yet, each time she stood up for herself, Tobi found a way to silence her with condescending remarks or cold stares. One evening, she confronted him directly. "Tobi, I need to understand something. Did you marry me for love, or did you marry me because you wanted a servant?" Tobi scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, Amaka. I married you because I love you. But love comes with responsibilities." She crossed her arms. "Responsibilities? Or control?" His face hardened. "Call it what you want. But as long as you're my wife, there are certain things I expect." Amaka's heart clenched. This wasn't just about marriage, it was about control, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could take it. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the salon, Amaka came home to find Tobi furious. "You didn't even call to say you'd be late," he snapped. She tossed her bag on the couch, rubbing her temples. "Tobi, I was busy. I barely had a moment to breathe." His glare deepened. "You always have an excuse. I am your husband, Amaka. You owe me respect." She had reached her limit. "Respect is earned, Tobi. You don't get to demand it while treating me like property." His expression darkened, and for a moment, she wondered if he would lash out. Instead, he stormed out, leaving her alone with the weight of their crumbling marriage. As she sank onto the couch, tears welled in her eyes. She had given her all to this marriage, but was it worth losing herself in the process? After their heated argument, Tobi withdrew into silence. He barely spoke to Amaka, answering her questions with grunts or nods. When she tried to engage him in conversation, he would pick up his phone or leave the room. The atmosphere in their home became suffocating. At first, Amaka thought the silence would pass, but days turned into weeks. She tried to bridge the gap, apologizing for things she wasn't even sure she had done wrong. But nothing worked. It was as if Tobi wanted her to feel the weight of his displeasure. One evening, she sat beside him on the couch and placed her hand on his. "Tobi, we can't go on like this," she said softly. "We need to talk." He pulled his hand away. "Talk about what? You already made it clear that you don't respect me as your husband." Amaka clenched her jaw. "Respect? Or submission?" Tobi stood abruptly. "If you can't see the difference, then maybe you should rethink what marriage means to you." For the first time, Amaka realized that love alone would not be enough to save their marriage. The tension between them seeped into every aspect of their lives. Tobi no longer waited for her to eat together, and Amaka found herself dreading coming home. At work, she could be herself, confident, independent, and respected. But at home, she felt like a prisoner in her own marriage. Tobi's mother didn't make things easier. She called often, reminding Amaka of her duty as a wife. "You have to be patient, my dear," she advised. "Men don't like stubborn women." Amaka bit her tongue, resisting the urge to tell her mother-in-law that patience had its limits. Then, the pressure to have children began. "When will you give us a grandchild?" one of Tobi's aunts asked during a family gathering. "A good wife's first duty is to bear children." Tobi's eyes darkened, but he said nothing. Amaka felt a new weight settle on her shoulders. One evening, after another tense dinner, Tobi finally spoke. "Amaka, I want you to cut down your work hours." She blinked. "What?" "I want you home earlier. A good wife doesn't put her career before her husband." Amaka stared at him in disbelief. "Tobi, my business is thriving. I worked hard for this. Why would you ask me to throw it away?" His expression was cold. "Because I am your husband. And I will not tolerate a wife who neglects her home." Amaka swallowed the lump in her throat. "So, this is it? Either I give up my dreams or I lose you?" Tobi folded his arms. "Make your choice." That night, Amaka lay awake, realizing her marriage was no longer a partnership, it was a battlefield. Desperate for guidance, Amaka reached out to her elder sister, Neka. "I feel I'm losing myself," she admitted during a visit. Neka sighed. "Marriage is not about losing yourself, Amaka. It's about finding balance. But if Tobi refuses to see you as his equal, you need to ask yourself, is this the life you want?" Amaka wiped a tear from her cheek. "I don't know what to do, Neka. I love him, but love shouldn't feel like this." Neka squeezed her hand. "Then you have a choice to make." For the first time, Amaka considered that leaving might be an option. Tobi's controlling nature worsened. He began checking her phone, questioning her whereabouts, and even showing up unannounced at her salon. One afternoon, as she was finishing with a client, he barged in. "Let's go," he said, ignoring the stunned stares from her employees. Amaka took a deep breath. "Tobi, you can't just show up at my workplace and demand I leave." His jaw clenched. "I am your husband, Amaka. You should obey me." Her hands trembled, but she met his gaze steadily. "I am your wife, not your possession." Gasps filled the salon. Tobi's face turned red with anger, but for the first time, Amaka didn't cower. Something inside her had shifted. She was done being controlled. That evening, Tobi exploded. You humiliated me today. Amaka stood firm. No, Tobi. You humiliated yourself. He stepped forward, his fists clenched. You will not talk to me like that. Amaka refused to back down. Then listen carefully. I will not be silenced. I will not shrink myself for you. Tobi's face contorted with rage, but he saw something different in her eyes, strength. And for the first time, he realized he could no longer control her. Amaka packed a small bag and stood at the door. I need space, Tobi. Until you understand that marriage is about partnership, not control, I won't stay here. Tobi stared at her, his expression unreadable. If you walk out that door, don't come back. She held his gaze, her heart pounding. Then, with one deep breath, she stepped outside. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. The morning after their heated argument, Amaka woke up to find Tobi already dressed for work, his face cold and unreadable. He didn't acknowledge her as he picked up his briefcase and walked out the door. This was his new tactic, the silent treatment. At first, Amaka thought he just needed time to cool off, but as days passed, his coldness persisted. He refused to eat meals she prepared, ignored her presence in the house, and barely spoke more than a few words to her. At first, she felt guilty. Had she pushed him too far? But then she reminded herself, why should she apologize for standing up for herself? The more Tobi ignored her, the more she focused on her salon, throwing herself into work to escape the tension at home. But deep inside, she knew things couldn't continue like this. Something had to give. A week passed, and the silence in their home became unbearable. Amaka had tried to initiate conversations, but Tobi either gave one-word responses or ignored her entirely. She wasn't sure whether to be angry or sad. She had never imagined that the man she loved would treat her like this, like she was invisible, like her feelings didn't matter. One evening, after dinner, she decided enough was enough. Tobi, we need to talk. He didn't look up from his phone. I'm busy. She snatched the phone from his hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. We are married, not strangers. If we have issues, we talk about them. You can't just shut me out. His jaw tightened. And what do you want me to say, Amaka? That I enjoy coming home to a wife who disrespects me? Disrespect? She almost laughed. Is it disrespect to expect to be treated as an equal? Tobi stood up abruptly. You'll never understand, Amaka. You're too stubborn. And with that, he walked away, leaving her alone in the deafening silence of their home. Amaka confided in Hifoma, who listened with a mix of sympathy and anger. You deserve better than this, Amaka, she said firmly. Marriage should not feel like a prison. I love him, Iffy, Amaka admitted, her voice breaking. But I don't know how much more of this I can take. Love is not supposed to hurt like this, Hifoma said. Talk to someone older, maybe. Someone he will listen to. That evening, Amaka called Tobi's older sister, Abimbola, hoping she could talk some sense into him. Abimbola sighed deeply after listening. I won't lie to you, Amaka. My brother is stubborn. But I'll try to talk to him, Iffy. Tobi, however, was furious when he found out. So now you're calling my family to report me, he snapped. Amaka, you're making things worse. She shook her head. I am trying to save our marriage. But you don't even care, do you? Tobi turned away, and for the first time, Amaka felt like she was fighting for a marriage that no longer existed. One evening, Amaka decided to take a break from the tension at home. She visited a cafe not far from her salon, seeking solace in a quiet corner with a cup of tea. As she sat there, lost in thought, a familiar voice startled her. Amaka? She looked up and saw Amaka, an old friend from university. They had lost touch over the years, but he still had the same warm smile she remembered. "Wow, Amaka. It's been ages," she said, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. They talked for hours, catching up on life, careers, and old memories. For the first time in a long while, Amaka felt seen, heard, and understood. As she laughed at one of his jokes, she realized something: she missed feeling happy. But when she got home later that night, Tobi was waiting. His eyes were cold, and his voice was sharp. "Who was that man?" Amaka froze. "What?" "I saw you with him. Laughing. Smiling." His voice was dangerously low. "You're my wife, Amaka. You will not embarrass me like this." Her stomach twisted in anger. "So now you care? Now that you think I'm with another man, you suddenly remember you have a wife?" Tobi clenched his fists. "Don't test me, Amaka." She squared her shoulders. "Or what?" For the first time, she wasn't afraid. And that terrified Tobi. The days that followed were tense. Tobi became colder, his resentment toward Amaka growing with each passing moment. He barely spoke to her, and when he did, it was only to issue commands. Amaka, on the other hand, had reached her limit. She was tired of being treated like a servant, tired of feeling like she had to shrink herself to fit into Tobi's outdated idea of a wife. One evening, she decided to confront him again. "Tobi, what exactly do you want from me?" she asked, standing in front of him as he sat on the couch. He looked up from his phone, uninterested. "What kind of question is that?" "A real one. Because you don't treat me like your wife, Tobi. You treat me like an object that must obey you." His jaw tightened. "A wife should respect her husband. And a husband should respect his wife," she shot back. "Or is that too much to ask?" Tobi's eyes flashed with anger, but he said nothing. For the first time, Amaka saw it clearly: he would never change. And that realization broke her heart. Amaka packed a small bag that night and left. She needed space to think, to breathe. Hifoma welcomed her with open arms, immediately understanding why she had come. "You did the right thing, Amaka," Hifoma assured her. "You deserve peace." Amaka nodded, but deep down, she was conflicted. She still loved Tobi, but love wasn't supposed to feel this way. Wasn't marriage supposed to be a partnership? Meanwhile, Tobi was furious when he realized she had left. He called her repeatedly, but she didn't answer. Instead, he called her mother. "Your daughter has abandoned her home," he complained bitterly. But Amaka's mother, to his shock, did not take his side. "A woman is not a slave, Tobi. If she left, you should ask yourself why." For the first time, Tobi felt something unexpected: fear. Fear that he was losing control over Amaka. Tobi's sister, Abimbola, came to visit him after hearing what happened. "You're handling this the wrong way, Tobi," she said, crossing her arms. "What do you mean?" "She disrespected me." Abimbola scoffed. "Or maybe you never respected her. Tobi, you married a strong woman. Did you expect her to just fold and obey your every word?" "She's my wife," he argued. "And you're her husband. Not her master." Her words struck something deep in Tobi, but he wasn't ready to admit it yet. Instead, he turned away, unwilling to face the truth: he was the reason Amaka had left. Alone in his apartment, Tobi found himself restless. The silence was deafening without Amaka's presence. He had spent so much time trying to mold her into his idea of a perfect wife that he never stopped to consider how she felt. Abimbola's words echoed in his mind: "You're her husband. Not her master." For the first time, he truly questioned himself. Was his idea of marriage outdated? Was he losing Amaka because he refused to see her as his equal? He scrolled through old pictures of them on his phone, moments when they were happy, when love flowed effortlessly between them. Was it too late to fix things? The next day, he did something he had never done before. He sought advice. He met with his older friend, Kunnel, who had been married for over a decade. Tobi, Kunnel said after listening to him, marriage isn't about dominance. It's about partnership. If you keep seeing Amaka as someone beneath you, you'll lose her. Tobi remained silent, but the words sank in. Meanwhile, at Hifoma's house, Amaka was battling her emotions. She loved Tobi, but she refused to return to a home where she was disrespected. He hasn't even called to apologize, she muttered to Hifoma. Because he's still stubborn, Hifoma replied. The question is, Amaka, if he changes, truly changes, will you go back? Amaka hesitated. She wanted her marriage, but not at the cost of her dignity. One evening, he stood outside her salon, watching her work. Clients adored her. She was a boss, a queen in her own right. And he had tried to dim her light. That night, she received a call. It was Tobi. Amaka, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. I need to see you. She wasn't sure what to expect, but something about his tone made her agree. When she met him the next day, he looked different, less sure of himself, almost vulnerable. I've been wrong, he admitted. I was raised to believe marriage meant control. I never saw you as my partner, and that was my biggest mistake. Amaka folded her arms. And now? I want to change. I need to change, he said sincerely. I don't want to lose you, Amaka. Her lips parted slightly, surprised. I don't want you to shrink, he admitted. I want to learn how to love you the way you deserve. A lump formed in her throat. Does this mean you'll stop seeing me as a woman who must obey and start seeing me as your equal? He nodded. Yes. Because I don't just want a wife, I want a queen by my side. For the first time in months, Amaka smiled. For the first time in a long time, she saw hope. Tobi and Amaka didn't fix everything overnight, but they started fresh. They had long conversations about respect, equality, and partnership. Tobi worked on unlearning his rigid beliefs, and Amaka, cautiously, gave him a chance. Their marriage had been on the brink of collapse, but with time and effort, they found balance. Tobi learned to appreciate Amaka for who she was, not who he wanted her to be. And Amaka, in turn, saw the man she fell in love with slowly re-emerging, one who was willing to grow. Their love story was not about submission, but transformation. And in the end, they found what they had lost, each other.
If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to our channel for more African folktales and legends. Help us keep the traditions of our ancestors alive by sharing our content with your friends and family. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.